Excuse me. Okay. So, Wayne Gretzky. I was hoping if you read the sermon title, The Great Ones, I was hoping you would that would pass across your mind, because he's called the Great One, right? Now, some of you know nothing about hockey. Perhaps well, you should, because you're Canadian, right? But Wayne Gretzky has been called the Great One, and because in many ways his achievements as a hockey player have really not even been surpassed to this day. So he played in the NHL for 20 years, which is quite a long career in hockey terms, and then he coached after that. But so he played for 20 years. He scored in that time 894 goals, and he made 1,963 assists. So that's twice as many assists as he had goals. In fact, he had more assists. Now, so just to explain, and Helen will correct me if I'm wrong. As I understand it, points, they give players points, but it's 1 point for an assist and 1 point for a goal, right? You get a point each. So the points he got for assists are more than anybody else has got with their goals and assists combined. Oh, by the way, do you know what an assist is? No. Okay. I'm assuming a lot here, because to shorten things up. It's where you help make the goal, right? So I just thought that's interesting. He's called the Great One, but actually his greatness had less to do with how many goals he scored and how wonderfully he was able to deke around everybody and score goals, as to how great a team player he was, how he set other people up to score goals. That's what assists are. And that's somebody who's actually serving the rest of his teammates. He's bringing them glory, and he's working for the team instead of just for himself. But it works out for himself too. So it's a little bit like what the topic is about here today. How do you get to be great, I suppose? So our gospel lesson today, which Mildred for Fraser read, has 3 chunks to it. So there's 3 parts, but they are related. And in the first part, it kind of builds on last week. So last week was from the previous chapter. We have Jesus predicting his sufferings and his death. And also, that was in Mark 8. This is Mark 9, and Jesus, once again, predicting his sufferings and his death. I think it happens again in Mark 10. So it happens 3 times in the gospel, kind of centered in the middle of the gospel. So it's actually a critical thing that Jesus is doing. So he predicts this. He says, he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. And if you look at all the predictions, there's actually quite a bit of detail in it. So Jesus, before the fact, is telling them, I'm going to be betrayed. It's not just going to be the soldiers are going to grab me. Somebody from our midst will betray me, right? So that's a prediction about Judas. He goes on, he will be, in the other text it talks about how he will suffer and how he will be delivered to, the chief priests and the Pharisees and the scribes. And, so there's all these details that he puts out. But he always ends it with, and after 3 days he will rise. So Jesus is actually showing himself to be the great prophet. I mean, to be able to know ahead of time this kind of stuff is astounding, especially to know that you're going to come back to life after they kill you. Try that one. That's a really hard one to predict and then follow through on. But what's the point? It says here that they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. So it was just like, what? This is all nuts. That's why remember Peter last week said, that won't happen to you. He rebukes Jesus because they can't even grasp this kind of thing. It's terrifying to think of. So they avoid it. But Jesus keeps pressing the thing home. And to me, that's for their sake. They were about to go through this thing that would probably be the most traumatic, difficult thing they'd ever done in their lives or been through in their lives. This guy that they'd invested their whole selves in, they kind of threw everything out the window and followed after Jesus for like 3 years. They're invested in his messiahship, whatever that's going to mean, and they think it's probably something military. And yet what's about to happen is the rug will be jerked out from underneath them. They will no longer be walking with the celebrity. They will be walking with, or actually it turns out abandoning this great celebrity person. So, he gets abandoned by everybody. He is shamefully treated and tortured and killed. And what would that be like for you if that was the person that you had invested yourself in? They're going to be crushed. They're going to be devastated. So he is preparing them for that. And that's a kindness, in a sense. It's a kindness to know what's going to come down the pipes, sometimes. Not always. but in this case, it would be, because then they could say, what happened? Well, he did. You know what? He said this would happen. And, if they thought real hard, they could say, and he said he's going to come back to life again. And they never really bought that until it actually happened. But then after that, they could say, wow, he actually predicted this was going to happen, which is why we have it in the Gospels, because they did eventually remember that. And that helped to solidify and strengthen their understanding of who he is, and put them in a better place for presenting the gospel to the world in later times. So it was a kindness to them, and also it was a preparation for them for the things that they were going to be called to do. And, so it's love. It's servant. It's serving them. So then there's this question. They get to Capernaum, and as we read the Gospels, some of them seem to indicate that Jesus had a house there. And this kind of one of them. When they came to Capernaum, when he was in the house, he asked them. So Capernaum is a key village in Galilee on the northwest kind of corner of the lake, fishing center and so on. And so they've been walking around the Galilean countryside, going from place to place. Now they're kind of at home, at Jesus' place. And he says to them, what were you arguing about on the road? So they thought, clearly, if you read this carefully, they thought they got away with it, and he didn't know what they were talking about, because they're embarrassed. It says, they were quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. I was just thinking about this actually as Mildred read it. That's an interesting thing. Sometimes we think we're getting away with things, and God doesn't know what we're thinking and doing and talking about and planning and plotting. Well, it kind of indicates here that that's not so. The disciples thought they were getting away with something. They were embarrassed when they stopped to think about it. But Jesus knew exactly what they were arguing about. So they don't tell him, but he sits down. They were arguing about who is the greatest, right? Who's the greatest? And we think, well, that's pretty silly. Who does that, right? Well, we never do that because we know that's impolite. But we may think that, right? Whenever we compare ourselves with others and think, well, I'm better than they are, whenever we do that, we're actually arguing about who's the greatest. And it's common among children. Children don't hide these kinds of things. And I don't know if you remember being a child, but when we were kids, sometimes the odd child, none of us, of course, the odd child that would say something like, well, I'm better than you because my mommy's a doctor, or, I'm better than you because I got better shoes. Look at my new shoes. Or I'm better than you because I got higher grades, and all this nonsense. And kids just say it right out there. They can be pretty cruel to each other because they're so blatantly honest about how they feel. I was thinking about this in terms of what's going on these days. So both the states are in their, the lead up to the electing their people that they might elect. What was that called? The party, the Democratic, I can't even remember these proper names. The Democratic and especially the Republican, what's it called? We're all at a stop here, a blank. The primaries. Thanks, Sarah. Good job, good memory. So, which is, takes up half the news, the American news, all the time, and yet the vote there is like next November. So it's a long, long process. So that, and of course, our Canadian election. And what is that about? It's about people jockeying for position in front of us to say, I'm the greatest. Really. This is why I'm so much better than these other guys or gals, whatever. What kind of that? And we force them into that position. We as a society force people into telling us why they're better than everybody else and why they'd be the greatest at the job. And it's kind of the same thing when people go to apply for a job. You go to apply for a job, there's a lot of pressure to sell yourself as being better than all the other possible candidates. This is why I'm the greatest. So it's not that far-fetched a thing to think of us doing it. So Jesus' answer is, because he says sitting down, which is his position to teach. He sits to teach. Jesus called the 12 and said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. So this is practically the simplest form, and Mark usually has things condensed quite a bit. He says, so in its simplest form, he says, you want to be the first of all? You need to be the very last and the servant of all. And I'm going to come back to that, but in one sense, he's pointing to himself. So the thing that he's told them he's going to do, suffer and die and be abandoned and then rise from the dead, that is he will end up being the least of all of humanity. And he will end up being the servant of all of humanity. Because that's what Jesus came to do. He said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many, by which he means for everybody. So every man, woman, child that has ever existed on planet Earth, Jesus came to die for them, for us. So he came to serve us to that degree where he would lay down his life for each and every last one of us. That's the servant heart, the heart of the servant, which is who Jesus is. So then the third chunk is he does a little demonstration with them. He has a child, and I kind of have in mind somebody about Ava or Jacob's age when I hear about this child. 2 or 3 years old, just kind of like prancing around the crowd there somewhere. And it's a two-part. He says, first he took a little child and had him stand among them. Maybe he was younger. Maybe he was just a toddler that could barely stand. So I think of my children too, when I think of this little child. So it's a little cute kid, and he puts them in the midst, and he draws their attention to the child. He says, "Take a look at this," and then he picks the child up in his arms, which is pretty cool. So we have here physical expressions of Jesus showing appreciation and love and affection for children. And then he says this: "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." So if you welcome one of these little kids, you're welcoming me. But no, not just me, not really me. You're welcoming my Father. So if you welcome a little child in Jesus' name, he says, welcome one of these little children in my name, you're welcoming God. You're welcoming God. So what does this welcome thing mean? What's it all about? There's a bit of background to this. Is we actually have a fairly better, a healthier view of children probably in our day in some ways than in Jesus' day. So in Jesus' day, children didn't have any rights whatsoever, okay? So men had some rights, women had fewer rights, and kids had no rights. I mean, they were a commodity. People sold their children, into slavery and stuff like that to get out of debt. You could do with a child whatever you wanted to. You could abuse them. You could kick them around. So it's up to the individual how well a child was treated. They had no rights. So that's kind of behind this. Jesus is suggesting that they have a much higher place in the eyes of God than they have in the eyes of society. And as the centuries have unfolded, and we look back in history, we see that children have been mistreated for these many centuries. I mean, the child labor situations that we've had to enact laws to keep kids from being abused in terms of child labor. And all kinds of things. Well, we know today. I just heard a story this week. I hear horrible stories. But there's the story in the news about the trial of the couple that killed their own child. Can you imagine? What's that about? And they're exploited, they're sexually abused and posted on the internet, all that kind of stuff. They're still abused and misused to this day. So what does it mean to welcome them? And I think it's a summation of a lot of things. It's being protective of them. It's protecting them. It's enjoying them. I remember the word I was trying to think of in Inglesby that I couldn't think. It's enjoying them. A child benefits from you knowing that you enjoy them. Sometimes adults tend to be kind of patronizing to a child. That's the word I was looking for. We're better than them. We're kind of superior to them. Oh, that's nice, dear. Be genuine with them. Enjoy them. They're wonderful. We probably all know this, hopefully. But, enjoy them. They need to see that you like them and that you get them to some degree. Respect, and kind of tied to that is respecting them. They're our equals. They're people too. And valuing them. Showing them that they're precious and that they're loved and they're cared for. And so that's, to me, that's what Jesus is saying. It's part of what he's saying. He said, whoever welcomes one of these, he says, welcomes me. Now this kind of rings to me of other things that Jesus teaches, like Matthew 25. Remember the sheep and the goats? The whole story. Well, Jesus says to them, I was hungry and you fed me, or you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, or you didn't give me something to drink. I was sick or in prison and you visited me, or you didn't visit me. And they say, well, when did we ever do that? He says, well, as often as you did it to the least of these little ones, you did it to me. And so that's kind of saying the same thing here, right? Whoever welcomes this child is welcoming me. Mother Teresa had this down to a fine science. She really had kind of built her whole mission around this idea and this understanding of what she was doing. So in Calcutta, she's ministering to these orphans and these dying women and people in the streets, people that are the castaways of society. But her perspective was, and you can read it if you read about this, was to whomsoever she was dealing with, she was doing it, they were Jesus to her. So when this poor dying child in the street that I'm going to take in, I'm helping Jesus out here. What a great perspective. And Jesus really tells us that is the way it is. So that's a kind of an eye-opener. So let's go back to Jesus' words here. He says, if you want to be the first, you must be the very last and the servant of all. And then he tells the story about, he demonstrates the child before them. So part of what he's obviously saying is being a servant of all is being a servant to a child. And perhaps also to those who are helpless like a child, so to maybe the elderly, or to those who have handicaps of various sorts. Particularly then, he's saying people who cannot serve you back, people who can't do anything for you, and people who cannot increase your standing in the world and in the eyes of others. If you help them, you're not going to get a lot of acclaim for it. In fact, it may well be hidden from the world's view, which is good, according to Jesus, because he says, when you do something, do it in secret, so that your heavenly Father, who sees in secret, will reward you openly. So that's the kind of thing he's talking about. It's an example here. Now, to be clear, and I find this intriguing about Jesus. I've come back to this a few times over the years. He doesn't say there's anything wrong with wanting to be great, right? He just says, if you want to be first. So he doesn't say you shouldn't want to be first. He just says, if you do, here's what you should consider. So there's nothing wrong with wanting greatness. So that kind of that's kind of being ambitious. Jesus is basically saying it's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to want to be good at things. So I found this quote I looked up ambition, and I got this quote from a famous person. And he says this about ambition: get going, move forward, aim high. Plan a takeoff. Don't just sit on the runway and hope someone will come along and push the airplane. It simply won't happen. Change your attitude and gain some altitude. Believe me, you'll love it up here. Here, Donald Trump. Wise man. So, I'm not sure if he's the best person in the world to present as, someone to follow after. But he's got a point. And I think the point is that we are designed by God to pursue excellence, to be the best or to do the best at whatever is brought to us to do. That not make sense? I mean, is there not a drive within us all for that, which sometimes we get lazy and ignore? But, there is something in us that says you should do the very best you can at this. It may not be as good as whatsoever. That doesn't matter. Let it be your best. And some people are keenly, wonderfully excellent at specific things. Like they focus their whole lives on being piano players or on being stockbrokers or something, right? And they get exceptionally good at it. That's their field of excellence, to the detriment of maybe many other fields, but that's okay. Somebody's got to be really good at those things. Most of the rest of us, we're generalists, I will say. I'm not really good at anything, but I'm kind of good at a few things or a bunch of things. What's it? Master of nothing, jack of all trades, and master of none. So most of us are something like that, and that's okay because then we can actually operate in a lot of different areas, and we're never going to be as good as the really good, but we can do the best we can with the time and the energy we have at whatever it is we're involved in, right? So, but at the same time, the scriptures differentiate between ambition and selfish ambition. And that's what was in James today. And just to review, he says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil." So this is the bluntness of James. He says, the selfish ambition thing, where you're just out for number one, to have it up on everybody else, he says, that's earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil. So that's a fairly clear statement about selfish ambition. So it's okay to pursue greatness and excellence, and Jesus tells us just exactly what we should pursue, and that is this. If you want to be the first, be the servant of all. It's not really what we go for when we first start out in life. Oh, that's what I got to do. Be the servant of everybody. But that's what Jesus says. And so I thought of, how do you do that? How do you practically be people's servants in your world, in your life? How do I do it? So here's some. I'm not saying that I'm great at these. These are some of the things that I'm working on, and I know you are too. So one, obviously, help people in practical ways. And that may be what we think of when we say be a servant. Oh, well, you help somebody out, If they're hungry, get them something to eat. If they need a roof over their house, put a roof over their house, if you can do it. They need their driveway plowed, plow their driveway. They need something that you can help them with, you help them with it. And that can be just on a personal, individual basis, or it can be in a bigger way. You can get involved with some group like the 4 Cs or the food bank, or the search, like people around here. There are many groups that are about that, about serving others, helping them out. And you know what I find in the churches most of the time, most of you, maybe all of you, are really good at this sort of thing. So the only thing to be wary of is to not let up about it. That is our call, right? To be helping people, to be serving people in practical ways. So don't quit. Keep going. So that's one. 2, maybe a little bit tougher in some ways. Give in to the wishes of others. That's another way you can serve people, is to give in to the wishes of others. Now, you have to be wise about this, because you can get used and abused. But it needs to be, I think, the general way of life for us as followers of Jesus. That we don't have to have our way. If they want to go, if the group wants Chinese and you want pizza, go Chinese for Pete's sake, Or if you're part of the group, maybe you should go pizza, that seems silly, but whatever. A couple, one wants to watch the baseball game and one wants to go visit Aunt Maud. Give in and go do what the other one wants to do. All the time, of course. Well, if you've been around a lot, you've got a little bit of wisdom, this is the answer to happy living. So when I'm talking with couples that are getting married, I often bring up this 1 Corinthians 13. Quote from it, "Love does not insist on its own way." And I had a wedding yesterday, and I was kind of shaking my head a little bit, because the couple wrote just about the whole service themselves, or they pieced it together. They were very involved with it. And the word flexibility was in this quite a bit, flexibility. That's really good. But I was watching this couple, and one of the pair was not very flexible. I just gonna have to say. There's some room to grow here. So that's 2. Give in to the wishes, desires of others. 3, listen respectfully to other viewpoints. This is one of my growing edges these days. Listen. Listening's hard, but especially when people have wacky ideas. So this is the best thing that's come out of Burger, Beer, and Bible for me, is I am forced, by virtue of just getting involved with this thing, to listen to people who have really strange ideas. There are people with ideas about conspiracies, people with ideas about evolution and atheism and agnosticism and all this kind of stuff. And it's hard for me to actually listen and try to really get where they're coming from. It's very alien to me. But I believe it to be a good thing to do. I don't think I have the right to speak to their lives unless they know that I've heard them out. And I actually was just reading, I'm an ardent creationist, as you know. So so the whole thing about evolution, I just about pull my hair out. It seems so silly to me. But I need to listen. In fact, I was reading a newsletter by one of the apologetics associations. I can't remember. Reasons to Believe, RTB. And they were just saying, look, if you want to talk to people about creation, and they're creationists, you really need to listen to them and you need to understand what the theory of evolution is, what they really think, what they really believe. Because so many people go into this argument and they don't know what the other side believes, and then there's no credibility. So, just in that area, so I guess I'm going to have to learn more. So, but whatever people's viewpoints are, I know you may think that they're just nuts and they're crazy. Respect them. And we say, what is it you think, and where are you coming from? Why do you think that? Like, get to know where people are coming from. It's hard. And that if you have those three, helping people, giving into others, and listening respectfully to other viewpoints, we can move on to number 4, which kind of builds on those. And that is this, and I think it's huger than we understand, and we need to understand. And you may not be ready for it yet, but I don't know. Share the good news of Jesus with people. That's serving people. Share the good news of Jesus with people. I mean, the best thing that ultimately anybody can do for another person is help them on the road to getting right with God through Jesus Christ. Help them to get reconciled to their Maker in Jesus. Help them to know His forgiveness and His love and His healing and His transformational power and the hope of eternal life and the infilling of God's Holy Spirit. I mean, if what we have isn't of value enough to share with anybody else, why are we bothering? We had a meeting, we had the chat group meeting on Thursday night, where we had representatives from the 8 local churches, and they were a lot of people belly aching about, how, we do all this and they still don't come to church. And then another person is saying, well, you know what? 80% of people in their 20s and 30s don't know anything about God or Jesus or the Bible, period. I'm thinking, well, duh, then how do you put all these things together? Here's a whole lot of people who are not Christians yet. Of course they're not going to come to church, because church is a place where Christians gather to grow and to worship, right? So, I mean, how are we going to lead them, help them, speak to them so that they develop a faith in Jesus Christ? And that's by telling them. However we may do it. None of us are great at it. That's okay. God uses whatever our feeble attempts are when we tell people what God has done for us in Jesus. And that's serving them. So I just throw that out there because we need to hear it, because the church, unless the Christians of this world share their faith with people, they won't get to know Jesus, and the churches will not grow. They can't grow by magic. It's like if you have no babies in the land, you're going to have a population decline. And if you have no spiritual babies in the land, you're going to have a spiritual population decline. People have to be born anew. They have to come into the knowledge of the grace of God in Jesus Christ. All right. You maybe noticed that was my peak point of the day. and number 5, and that may take, we need to pray about that so that God prepares us and strengthens us so we can do that well. 5, pray for people. This is serving them. Pray for people. And tell them, sometimes, not always, tell them that you're praying for them. That's meant to be a big part of our lives. And I think we talked about it a few weeks ago, but to pray for people, whether anybody knows it or not, just you and God, you are serving them. It's a wonderful service. We're to spend our time, our energy, our mental energies in prayer. We're to learn that as a discipline, and that also attunes us to other kinds of servanthood when we pray for them. So this is all about the life of Jesus being formed in us. Okay, it's not something that we can gear ourselves up to do. This is conversation about what Jesus is like, how He is, and what we can expect will happen as His person is formed in us. Because Jesus is the servant with the capital S. And all He wants is actually to serve through us, to let His life flow through us so that it's actually Christ Himself serving others as we serve. Shall we pray?